In this video, we will talk about the deployment phase of SDLC. So let us look at the SDLC and see where we land. So we went through planning, requirements, design, development, testing, and finally you reach to deployment. So whatever you have tested, you finally deploy it and you let it out to the user base. So deployment is one of the most important and significant steps in your SDLC because whatever you envisioned at the beginning of your cycle is now coming to the world and everyone can get access to it. You can think of deployment as moving away from development and testing to a live environment where your users can actually interact with your software or your product. When you are in deployment phase, it is usually characterized by how good your system is, how performant your system is, and how does it meet your users' satisfaction. So let's see what are the importance of deployment phase. Well, a successful deployment minimizes your downtime and gets your system up and running immediately or as quick as possible without even the users noticing that your deployment has gone through. Of course, your initial deployment versus your subsequent deployments will be differently strategized, but the point is that you have minimum impact to the end user. And as you're doing the deployment, your users can finally see your system. So there is some kind of a satisfaction, or at least if I'm investing money into the product, I'm seeing the results finally. So they are very happy to see that deployment phase come through. And when you have deployed your application, it definitely has some means for you to reflect on how that application is meeting the user's need. There are many strategies that you can apply for your deployment. There is Big Bang deployment, there is phase deployment, there is blue-green deployment, there is Canary deployment, and lastly, there is continuous integration and automation. We are going to talk about all of these strategies in the next slide. So what is Big Bang deployment? Well, the Big Bang deployment, as it says, it's like a big bang. You deploy everything that you have been working on together in one stroke. This is usually the case when you have your first initial release, and then after that, your deployment cycles or the deployment pushes become smaller, but you still have to push everything. So for example, if any of the states of your country wants to launch a product to their citizens, usually they will want to have it available to everybody so everyone is taken care of equally, right? So that's a big bang deployment. It is very straightforward. You plan something, you finish something, you deploy something, right? But the problem is there is a lot of risk because from your inception to your actual deployment, there are too many things that can occur and that can jeopardize your deployment or probably timelines in most cases. And when you deploy such an application where you have all your functionalities bundled together, deployed at once, the opportunities for anybody to find defects or bugs in your system increases, which means your issues in the system exponentially rises. And therefore, this type of deployment is considered a little risky for your purposes. The next comes in the phase deployment. Phase deployment lets you release your software in phases, in different stages. This also allows you to gather feedback on how each of your phase has been through. So therefore, you can adapt that feedback in your next phase. So iteratively, your deployments get better and better. This approach significantly reduces your risk because now you don't have a widespread unavailability and make sure that your transition is a little smoother and in phases. So you know that you can target a set of users, then another, and then another. So a good example of that was when we released something in production for a different state, and now we could not release the product to the entire state. So what we did was we released it to specific counties. So now our user base is very restricted, which means that you can act on that feedback and then make it better for the rest of the audience. This strategy is particularly very advantageous for large scale and complex projects. A quick shout out to myself. I have written a book or a handbook on Scrum Master for PSM1 certification. It drives you through fitness application that you can follow along so that you can understand the different principles of Scrum and Agile. This book is available for free and the link is in the description section. So blue-green deployment is your next type of deployment. What happens in this? You actually have to alternate environments. And this blue channel becomes your main environment and green channel becomes your new deployment or the new functionality. Whenever the user is already using blue channel, you slowly divert traffic to your green channel so that users won't realize that they're moving to the green channel and the traffic is redirected and they start using your new features as and when it comes to. And when entire traffic is moved from blue channel to green channel, you can decommission the blue channel. This gives you an opportunity to actually roll back if there is an issue on the green channel. So if there is a problem in the application on the green channel, you just switch it off and move entire traffic back to the blue channel. So at least the users are not impacted with this. The next approach is the Canary deployment. Think about it as releasing your software in different small canaries or small segment of users. So now when you're releasing to a smaller segment of users, you can identify the issues and the performance related to your application. And if you need to start adjusting to the next canary, it's like iteration. You go ahead and fix those problems. This strategy is excellent for programs or software where you want to make sure that you release features with minimal impact and have an opportunity to refine and deliver. The next strategy is continuous deployment and integration, which is also called as CI/CD at times, right? Continuous integration and continuous deployment. This is one of the most popular strategies that have come to light recently. So what has happened is you want your teams to be fast and agile. In such scenarios, your software development has to go through a smooth transition and a faster turnaround. So what happens in CI/CD or continuous integration and continuous deployment is as soon as your development team passes a particular code or a feature, it moves into higher environment. It gets validated, it gets moved to the higher environment. And whenever there is a movement from one environment to the other, it has to be within the sprint in most cases. That way you're shipping a bunch of products every particular sprint or small iterations. What happens is you do not have to wait for a deployment window for the software to reach your end person or the end user. You can actually automate it. So whenever a testing team clears a particular feature onto an environment, you then directly approve and move it to deployment. And seamlessly, the new user that comes into the application starts seeing that feature enabled for them. So this is very good for constantly seeing progress, for constantly giving feedback to the users, and also it is easy for the team to understand and fall into a pattern. It definitely accelerates all your deployment cycle. So therefore, it is one of the most used these days in terms of your deployment strategies. You can use tools like Jenkins or Travis to automate this. There are also different repos like Git, GitLab, Bitbucket who have their own CI/CD pipelines that you can use if you put your code on source control on those products. So let us recap on what we saw in the deployment phase. We saw what is deployment, we saw the importance, then we also saw different strategies in deployment. So you had Big Bang, you had phased, you had blue-green, canaries, and then finally you had the CI/CD or continuous integration and deployment. The common question I get is, what are the main issues or challenges during deployment? The biggest challenge during deployment is to maintain consistency with your users. There's no downtime, and also avoid any side effects or issues that turn out with your deployment going into production, which means you have to do your testing thoroughly. So if you address these two bigger problems, your deployment should ideally go smoothly. How do you choose the right deployment strategy? Well, it completely depends on what you are aiming for. What's your user base? How complex is your project? How often do you get user feedback? All of these factors into how you want to choose your deployment strategy. In most cases, at least in the modern development, I would personally prefer CI/CD because it is very agile. You can get immediate feedback and your customers are also kept in the know-how. But again, all these factors determine what you want to do with your deployment strategy. Lastly, the only limit to our realization of tomorrow is our doubts of today. So do not hesitate. Get your product out, get it deployed. If you're looking for more in-depth idea or project management strategies, learning Scrum and Agile, you can enroll in my course, the link for which is in the description. If you have any questions or you need to read about any article, I have curated a lot of content on my website, teachingagile.com. Do take a look. And lastly, like, share, and subscribe to this video so that makes YouTube happy. I will see you in the next class.